To discuss the Biden administration's response to January 6th, I want to bring in Alex Gangitano. She's a White House correspondent for The Hill. Alex, welcome. President Biden and Vice President Harris are expected to address the January 6th insurrection Thursday, exactly 1 year after the deadly riot. But you have new reporting about how different Democrats want to approach these remarks. What is the disagreement, and what do we know about the White House's plan?
Thanks so much for having me. So the White House has been largely quiet on what we will expect out of the president on Thursday, besides the fact that he will be addressing the nation in some capacity alongside Vice President Harris. So we spoke to some sources about, how people want the president to approach such a consequential speech a year after the deadly riots at the Capitol. And so what we heard largely is that the president should not overly politicize the anniversary. And even the fact that he shouldn't use President Trump's name very often or often at all. And I think a lot of the reasoning for that is that would speak to the kind of brand that President Biden has tried to bring to the Oval Office, which is, uniting the country, bringing together people through tough times, as opposed to trying to over-politicize things. Of course, this is a very politicized situation. We have the House committee investigating the January 6th riots going on as this anniversary approaches, and several people aligned with President Trump subpoenaed as a result. But if the president comes out and makes this all about him winning the election and blaming President Trump, sources that we spoke to wonder if that would kind of leave a bad taste in Americans' mouth, as opposed to trying to make it about uniting the country during a tough time like this.
No doubt a lot of careful thought is going into those remarks coming up on Thursday. Back in July, as you know, President Biden marked 6 months following the attack. Remind us of what he said then.
Yeah, so that speech to mark the 6 months, we can kind of see a bit of a roadmap of what to expect out of the president on Thursday. So like I mentioned, the president called for unity. He said that, democracy prevailed on January 6th and that Americans should work together to protect and preserve it. That repeats a lot of what Democrats have been saying over the last year. It's just, looking at the fragility of the American democracy. He also spoke about voting rights legislation and used that as an appeal for Democrats to push forward that legislation in Congress. We've heard that Majority Leader Schumer is planning on also using the Thursday anniversary to push for voting rights legislation and to get his party aligned to actually act on legislation this Congress. And then also the president in July offered his condolences to the families of the Capitol police officers lost on January 6th, or lost as a result in the days after January 6th. And I'm sure we'll see that from the president as well. He often is seen as the consoler in chief, of somebody who can speak about loss very intimately. And I think he'll use this as another opportunity to really highlight that this was a deadly riot and there were lives lost as a result of it.
Such a good point. So important to remember and honor the victims as we approach January 6th. Recent CBS News polling shows nearly 7 in 10 people surveyed say January 6th represents a sign of increasing political violence. The poll also found about 2/3 of Republicans say there was widespread voter fraud in 2020, which we know is completely untrue. Are these two issues something the Biden administration is concerned about and feels it needs to address?
And I think that polling out of Americans also largely affects the partisan differences over the meaning of January 6th that have divided Congress over the last year, too. We're seeing, as this polling indicates, people in the states feel the same way that members of Congress feel, that there's this huge split in how to handle the day, how serious the day was, and how serious, election reform and even feeling like the president won the election in 2020. So I think that is a huge concern of the Biden administration. It seems like right now they're trying to tackle that concern by calling for voting rights legislation as kind of a first step to do that. Of course, that's difficult in the narrow margins in the Senate to get that passed. So it'll be interesting to see how much the president speaks about this divide and how much he tries to convince Americans that this was a serious day and that, allegations that he didn't win the election need to be ended, a year later, or if he'll just try to look ahead into the future and try to avoid that polling and the split in the population and see what we can do going forward on the issue.
A big message indeed coming up. Alex Gangitano, thank you for your time and your reporting.